Now's your chance.
He's like,
Because
I didn't
of the
prepare for
Palacio
that.
brothers. Which one has? Is it Jake Bowers or the Palacio brothers that have better exit velo?
Oh man, here we go.
Launch angle and
here we go. Our player development analyst from Marquee,
ready,
Lance
AJ.
Brozdowski, joining us. Lance, AJ's been waiting a while to have you back since our fun debate a few months ago about the Yanks. So here it is, guys. The floor is yours.
I'm going to let Lance go ahead and
AJ,
explain to me why the Yankees got rid of Jake Bowers, since he was the second coming of, whoever.
They extracted their value. They moved on, man.
Oh. Okay.
I will say this. They
replaced. It's ruthless.
Well, they replaced Rowdy Tellez with Jake Bowers.
I'll take Rowdy over Jake Bowers.
I think Rowdy's pretty pissed. Who's a better player?
I'll take Rowdy.
Lance?
I'll take Rowdy too.
There we go.
Okay.
We've got him converted.
We actually agreed on something.
We've got him converted. What do you think so far of the Yanks offseason, though? I mean, obviously they bring in Soto. We can all agree he's freaking awesome. And was the Dylan Lawson firing before or after we brought on?
It was before
Lance?
We brought him on.
Before?
It had
Lance
to have been,
got him fired.
Lance did get him fired. Lance talked about Jake Bowers, and Dylan Lawson got fired.
It's all my fault. I'm sorry, but he got skipped by the Red Sox recently. I don't know if you saw that. So
no, that's what we want to ask you about.
Like what they saw.
Is this a win or a loss for the Red Sox bringing him in?
I'd say it's a win. I mean, I still think the main point that I had back when AJ and I were debating all the Yankee stuff is just they did a really good job and have done and will do a really good job of creating the kind of hitter that succeeds in Major League Baseball. We just haven't seen it totally convert at the Major League level, whether that's a disconnect between the minor and major leagues, perhaps, that might be the case. But I think Breslow's a really smart guy. I met him a couple times here in Chicago and had some conversations. And I think he obviously saw something good with what Lawson did from a track record standpoint. I think it's just a matter of let's see that communication, obviously, between the minor leagues and the major leagues in Boston, whether it's better.
So the communication may have been the issue. When you haven't played and you have a communication barrier with Dylan Lawson may have had a communication barrier with big league hitters. How do you connect that? You're talking about connecting like the minor leagues and the big leagues. It's two different games. It really is two different games. The minor leagues, like AA, sometimes is better than AAA. So how do you communicate that from not just a X's and O's kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it comes from tone at the top. I think it comes from front office pushing down incentives and structures and what do you want to call them? KPIs, key performance indicators, or things that go through the minor league system such that everyone understands and believes in the same thing, such that you don't have a situation where, the minor leagues are taught one thing and then you get to the major leagues and you have a differential of what is valued per se. So I think it really comes from maybe not a guy like Lawson, but a guy at the top that, like a Breslow that is able to communicate all the way down through structure, through the minor leagues and stitch together that performance and the ideas that they want the major league team to value as well as the minor league team. So it may have nothing to do with Lawson. I'm not taking a shot at the Yankees front office specifically. I think that's how you would create congruency between multiple levels and not have maybe this communication issue where you have a really good coach, clearly based on the performance he generated and based on him being immediately poached by Breslow. But just you didn't see it manifest at the major league level. I think there's a lot of variables that go into why that didn't happen. But my guess is perhaps maybe a change of scenery, a different org philosophy, and top down's a little different maybe in Boston than New York. Obviously, that could help.
So I'll take you to a team that you know well, the Chicago Cubs. Obviously, there's not much to talk about yet with them this offseason. But tell me, A, what you thought of the Council move. And there's no stat, obviously, to put to a manager in terms of like wins and losses that he can bring to a new team, right? It's not like a war statistic for a manager, but do you look at managers as a net plus or minus gain? Can you do that in any way to quantify what he could bring to the table? And then to spin it forward, what are the Cubs going to do? Because clearly they're not going to bring in a big money manager and just sit on their ass. I think they're just almost seems like waiting for some free agents to come to them.
Yeah, no, the Council move was shocking. I was actually on vacation, so I had no idea. I was driving with my girlfriend. We were actually in Hawaii, and it's the one vacation I'm taking. It was a big one, and I'm driving and my phone was off. Like I tried to detach as much as possible. And she's like, you have like 85 messages. And I was like, oh my God. It's like we had people running in the studio here at Marquee, the sports network, the RSN for the Cubs. And so I had no clue. I was pretty detached from it. I think everyone was beyond stunned. Some of the coaches I talked to on the Cubs were also completely stunned as to it occurring. They were completely blindsided. But yeah, I think you hit on a really interesting point and something that earlier this season I had a really good debate with Cliff Floyd, who is an analyst who comes in all the time for us, great guy. He and I talked a lot about how you like evaluate managerial decision making. And I think the thing I come back to all the time on it is just it's really hard to understand and improve something that you're not measuring. And I think we inherently just don't measure managers at all. And I'd actually love to see some kind of stat website or something, at least attempt to pull together some kind of percentage on managerial decision making, even if it's just like pitcher pulled when, at a certain point in a game over in the 6th inning or 7th inning, and who does he bring in? Like, what is the success rate of that move? And it's based on, I don't know, you want to bring in probability or anything along those lines. I feel like we need something maybe a little more tangible for us to go to on the managerial side of things. Cause oftentimes I feel like we hit on managers for the low points, the issues that, we hated that move and it resulted in a loss. Like, sure, that's one thing, but maybe we're not complimenting them enough for smarter moves of pulling a pitcher and being, creating a win for that team and organization. So I'd love something like that. I don't know if there's a stat side out there. I know we got stuff on umpires now. There's umpire scorecard. Why not like a managerial scorecard?
Because managerial scorecard's based on wins and losses. That's really...
Hey, I'm fine with that. Then. I'm fine with that.
And there's value in pulling a guy and having him ready for the next 2 days instead of leaving him out there to dry, all that stuff. I think that'd be awesome. But the analytic breakdown that I need to hear from you is Cody Bellinger. Is Cody Bellinger the MVP that we saw a few years ago? Is he the last 2 seasons, or is he just the season? Now you can talk about him. I know you're on Marquee. Maybe you got to be a little nice to him. He's not a Cub right now. What is Cody Bellinger, and should he get X amount of money?
That's a really good question. I made a video on my YouTube about this where I kind of broke it down. It's a tough one to dig into. I think at the end of the day, Dustin Kelly and the hitting brass here did a really good job on getting him, as I've talked to individuals in the organization about, and Cody himself, I had a conversation with him earlier this year about it, is getting him on playing more with the ball. And I think particularly what that resulted in was admitting perhaps that he was not going to be able to hit the ball 115 plus consistently like maybe he did back in 2019, et cetera. Like, let's toggle down the approach a little and put ball in play more. And it worked, right? We saw him in 2 strike counts. If you look at this comparison to 2 strike counts between him and like Ronald Acuna, it was surprisingly similar. A lot of his production came in 2 strike counts. Now, the question from the analytics side, I think going forward, is how much of that is predictable? How much is this reliance on going the other way and cutting down your bat speed and pushing balls to the left side? How predictable is that going forward? And that is a really interesting question. Most of the time, for a guy that overperforms this much, what you'll run into is pull side power. The name that always comes up is Isaac Paredes with the Rays, where he's a guy that is overperforming a lot of his peripheral statistics because he pulls so many of the balls that he hits. And that's a very specific approach for him. I don't necessarily think that a guy like Cody Bellinger should go towards that crazy pull approach, but it gives me more confidence in some overperformance of some of the underlying peripheral statistics if maybe you're pulling the ball more. Cody did not do that. So I think the problem with his free agent candidacy right now is just that all the front office are kind of thinking how I'm thinking. Well, I think, at least, I don't mean to be like egotistical here, but I think they're all looking at the underlying stuff and going, okay, how much of this is real and how much of it is the Dustin Kelly adjustment, this getting into your legs more, the ability to put bat on ball in 2 strike counts? How much is that versus how much is he the 10% or 20% hard hit rate that was relatively low for the most part, especially in 2 strike counts? It's a really interesting question. I'm not entirely sure what happens. I just have a feeling this is completely I don't have any inside info here. I'll state that again. I work for the Cubs network, but I wonder whether the Cubs are just kind of waiting around and seeing where the market shapes out and wonder whether they're a team that maybe isn't going to totally overpay him. There's a Farhan Zaidi quote where if you're rational on every free agent, you're never going to get one. I think it's a great example here. You only need one team to be irrational on a guy like Cody Bellinger and believe his bat-to-ball ability for them to pay him over $200 million. As to whether the Cubs do that, I can't say. I'm wondering whether the market comes in a little softer than maybe everyone was expecting.
Okay, I got to ask you this because during your comments about Cody Bellinger, you brought up Paredes, and you just said he does this.
Yeah.
Well, didn't you just make an argument against analytics? Because you said that Paredes beats the analytics so you just made a point that humans are human and analytics aren't always right. So now I'm kind of confused because you were super heavy analytics are the answer, analytics the only way to raise, and then you just made an argument that, man, sometimes people are human and analytics aren't always right.
It's crazy. It's crazy, AJ. I know. So I think the main thing is I think analytics are just not covered properly on most media. We just don't talk about them in the right way. I'm totally open to considering non-analytic angles as the reason for performance. I actually love those conversations more with coaches and other people I talk to than the ones that are fully in on the analytics. I think the best thing an analytic department can do is have smart people in there such that they have the confidence to not believe analytics when they're telling them something. That's how you get edge. Everyone has the same information, I think, for the most part, in front offices and are thinking very similarly, especially organizations like the Dodgers, the Rays, the Brewers, etc. To the point where the edge in those organizations is the guy looking at the data going, I think we're missing something here. Let's do this on the guy. And then you get success, and the other couple orgs are like, man, we wouldn't have done that. So that is my whole MO, is I love talking about how analytics are wrong, but I don't think we have enough people who properly communicate analytics in the first place. So I'm trying to do that first, but I'm happy to have the nuanced debate. The funny thing with Isaac Paredes is pulling the ball is very analytically driven. So he's almost he's defying the underlying stats, but he's doing so in a way that is inherently analytical, right? All your power comes from getting out in front of the plate to your pull side for the most part, was what the data says. Paredes is just doing that more than anybody in baseball. He pulls balls, I think, between 95 and 105 exit velocity almost 70% of the time, which is astronomical compared to most other guys in baseball.
So who would you say is going to have a better sustainable swing based on the changes that they made? Christopher Morel, who was a analytic dream, hitting dingers and striking out. Obviously, analytically, you don't want to strike out, but it's okay. It's just
they don't care. You get rewarded for strikeouts.
You don't get rewarded. I'm not trolling like AJ. You're not getting rewarded.
I'm not trolling,
but some of the knocks, and you're not talking about a $200 million player with Christopher Morel, but is that approach okay for an organization to adopt a Cody Bellinger type of adjustment that he made to put the ball in play more?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the nuance there that maybe is tough to isolate off in that argument is just the health of a guy like Cody Bellinger. He's obviously run into so many injuries in the past that maybe that's partially the reason why they went towards more of the two-strike approach, because they're we're not entirely sure if we could get you hitting the ball 115 plus, just hitting absolute tanks to right field and stuff and leaning into that pull side power. With a guy like Morel, he's all about the pull side approach. That's where he's going to get to most of his power. He also has power to center field as well. But he is the analytic darling. He's the guy who's going to post the well above average barrel rate in that respect. I don't necessarily think I would lean on him having a more controlled adjustment to maybe put the ball in play more. I think I'd want him to just maybe mature more as a hitter and isolate off where he's swinging in the zone such that you lower some chase. That's maybe the approach with him. I don't think he's a guy that I'd want choking up and completely shortening up in two-strike counts. I think I'd want him, maturing and understanding the zone a little better, chasing less, swinging in zone more on balls that he could do damage on. That overlap of do you swing where you do damage is the analytic question I think is brought up a lot, and I like looking at a lot. And I think a guy like Morel is a good example of that. It's try to maybe help him understand those sliders out or third in the zone are fine as takes. He's never going to do damage on them, so wait more for something that's middle of the plate, a little more inside in that respect. So I don't necessarily know if I'd apply a Bellinger approach to a guy like Christopher Morel.
Lance, as you probably know, definitely am more in the middle on the analytics conversation. And in fact, coming from working for the league for many years, it's sometimes all we talked about. So, and I hosted shows on that front. Sure. So I would say I'm definitely, playing both sides here. What I do think is very poisonous to that debate is what Jerry DiPoto said during his press conference. We've had players on since then. 54% is going to be on every freaking t-shirt for Seattle fans at the ballpark this coming season, especially if they don't start moving their asses, because the problem is not only does he say that coming off a season when they missed the playoffs and really didn't go for it this past season in terms of going to last offseason and at the trade deadline when you give away your closer. So what did you think of those comments, how negative they could perceive the debate there, and then the Mariners in general adding that they're essentially either cutting or keeping payroll in a similar spot after tanking for years to get to this point?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I think at the end of the day, I don't want to get canceled here. I think at the end of the day, what
canceled by who? The analytics crowd?
Yeah, exactly. Non-analytics crowd, whatever. Baseball people generally. At the end of the day, I think this is my take is that if he just said we're trying to win like 95 plus games a year, I think that would have gone over much better than if he said 54%. I just think people don't inherently. This is a weird thought. But they don't inherently convert 54% to like a win basis. Like it's almost like a miscommunication of data for the most part. Like the way I love talking on air here is like convincing our demographic, which is generally like an individual that isn't below, say, the age of 50, convincing them to believe in analytics without actually bringing up analytics at all, right? Like if I could communicate that this hitter is really good because he leans into his pull side power without showing something like a WRC plus, I feel like I'm doing my job better, you know? And with Dipoto, I just thought the 54% was completely missing the point. Like what he's trying to say is this team is trying to be in a position to be a wild card every year. If you win 54% of the games in a season, you're winning like 87 to 88 games, right? That's a wild card team. The Diamondbacks got to the World Series winning 84 games or whatever. Like inherently what he's saying from a very nerd analytics standpoint makes sense. The communication of it was terrible. Like from a PR standpoint, I'm not a PR person, but like just say 95 wins. You know, that's like 58%. Like you could have mitigated all this disaster just by going in that direction and reframing it overall. But the other thing, again, that I will never, like I always have to lean on other people for, I lean on a lot of talent we have here for, is understanding how that affects a clubhouse. So this is, I think, a great question for Eric and AJ. It's just like, you hear that as a guy in a clubhouse, like I imagine you are like very angry that your GM is saying that. Like, I'm not trying to win 54% of games. I'm going out there trying to win 100% of my games. That's the mindset I have to have as a player. Whereas the front office is thinking much more, and I brought this up when we talked about the Yankees in the past. They're thinking about it, unfortunately, from like a portfolio standpoint. Dipoto's looking at it and going, is if our median win is right at that 54% mark, then our range of outcomes will push us to like 95 wins some years, and other years we might miss the playoffs slightly. But they're trying to position their team to be slightly above average, such that they get the good end of variance often and end up in the playoffs. He just communicated it terribly. I would have just said 95 wins, we would not be here at all. And that's like 58% or 59%. It's just people don't inherently convert 54% to a win basis. So I think that was the main problem with the communication on it.
As a player, yeah, I want 100% of the wins. You know you're not going to get them. As a fan who's putting good money out there, you're like, wait a minute. So every other game that I spend $395 to bring my family to a game, I'm not going to see a win. They're not trying to put the best team on the field. But we're going to go to teams who are looking to try to put the best team on the field. I want you to break down, because I've watched video and I've seen the numbers that are getting thrown out there. I want you to break down Yamamoto compared to my guess of $265 million compared to Imanaga at a much more palatable. I'm not sure what I had him at. Doesn't matter. I can't find.
You had him like at Kratz. I think you had him, under 100.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that Kratz goes to his own list and is like, well, this is what he's going to get.
Well,
it's his guess.
I know. It's just funny that's what we're basing our deals off of.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good debate. I mean, yeah, the money side is interesting. At the end of the day, I'm not the one spending the money, right? So I'd say just go for the better pitcher, who's Yamamoto. I don't really care what you pay him, but that's obviously not the calculus that a front office has to make. They have to make the calculus based on the amount of money they're going to pay him for the amount of years they're going to pay him. I do think that the reason Yamamoto's drawing so much interest is that he's 25 years old. I love what he does on the mound. I made a video that I thought was a little more lukewarm on him overall, and I think that got perceived pretty poorly by a lot of people. They're just kind of like not interested in that. And I was just trying to provide another perspective. Like, my perspective is that I do think it's more of like a pitchability arm. And that is something inherently that I think is a little bit harder for us to quantify on the data side. Eno Saris does a really good job providing like a location plus score. There's just a lot of variance in that score year over year and also start to start. that is essentially suggesting that command can waver, which I think most people would probably agree with to some extent. Like, the guy isn't going to have the average pitcher isn't going to have the same level of command on a start-to-start basis. So I think he's a pitchability guy. Despite that, I do think there's some really strong underlying traits that he throws. He throws 95 plus. It's hard for me to knock the guy as an analytics guy if he's throwing 95 plus. The fastball shape's really good. I really like the splitter. Splitters, again, are like the best pitches in baseball at limiting barrels and generating swing and miss. I've always been curious to see whether we get more of a revolution, more guys throwing it. I understand it's something that depends heavily on finger size and finger width, etc. But just wonder whether a lot of teams are more apt to throw that pitch once they see guys dominating like a Yamamoto with that offering. So I like Yamamoto. I think it's pitchability based. If you want like the non-analytic angle that's a little more nuanced, I really like his ability to take his four seam, particularly versus right-handed hitters, and split location on it, where he could go kind of backdoor away and also throw it up. I think essentially that creates two pitches for him, especially like ahead and behind the count. He could kind of toggle between them. The example I drew, I was recently on Yes Network, and I drew was like Garrett Cole does this against right-handed hitters, whereas like a Carlos Rodon doesn't. Carlos Rodon is kind of like up away no matter what versus right-handed hitters, whereas Garrett Cole can kind of split location and go up and away. So I like that nuance kind of take of like, I think the fastball might play up even more because of the multiple locations to righties. The slider's good. I'm curious to see what they tweak with him. We saw a guy like Senga come into the majors and add a sweeper. The sweeper got killed. He went to more like a gyro downer slider. That worked really well for him. A guy like Imanaga, it's very different. He's lower velocity. When we saw him in WBC, the velo was up slightly. He's a lefty, which I think inherently adds a lot of funk. And the thing I've heard regurgitated through the media a lot on Imanaga is that his pitch shapes are like interesting. And what I really think that's getting at is the fact that he's unique and his fastball is unique. He throws from a relatively low release height and is able to get a lot of carry on his ball. From a left-handed pitcher standpoint, we just don't see this a lot. The way you see this a lot is through the two names that I came up with digging through some data are Alex Vesia and Nestor Cortez, are the two that kind of comp most closely to that fastball shape. One's a reliever, one's a starter. So I think he has that inherently working for him. He also throws a slider to lefties, which is really nasty, and he also throws a pretty sick splitter that I think is actually like kind of like a slower-ish version of a guy like Senga's, where it doesn't have a ton of arm side movement because of how he's throwing and how over the top he is. It kind of just spins on its way to the plate. So I like Imanaga for the price. He's had a little bit of like a home run problem. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher, so I'm curious to see what park he goes to. That might have some influence on some of the results. Yamamoto to me is like, you're paying because he's 25 and you're betting that your department can make him maybe even better than you initially see him as. But I really think that that's the key thing to point out with Yamamoto is he's 25 years old and he's going to get this much money because you rarely see the ability to control a guy for 8, 9, 10 plus years at 25 years old. As a pitcher specifically, most pitchers we have debuting are just kind of nowhere around the age such that you would come out of your third or fourth year arbitration being 25. It just never happens. So this is like a very rare opportunity.
I like a great breakdown. And so now I know you wanted to throw a question at our catchers here on the set. So what do you got for them in terms of a certain pitch that you think might kind of start to blow up in the bigs?
Yeah, I'm curious whether you guys think we'll have like a splitter revolution at any point. This is something I love asking people in organizations about what they think trends will be in the coming years. And this is one that's come up a bit to me. It's just like, yeah, I think we'll try to get more guys throwing splitters. Now, the old school idea here is just like, it causes injuries, don't do it. But I just think that's such a nuanced take that it's missing a lot of the point. We're like, if a guy's not particularly great and we think a splitter could really help him, then perhaps taking the risk of going to a splitter and assuming a little more injury risk is actually worth it long-term for that guy to have some kind of major league career. I think there's a lot of nuance to it. I'm curious if you guys believe the idea that it causes injuries as much as maybe some of the old school beliefs think, and whether we'll get a revolution.
Well, I always thought it was one of the harder pitches to hit. If you could get a guy that threw it correctly, like a Tim Hudson, Jose Contreras, Roger Clemens, Schilling, those guys threw it, and it was really hard to hit because it has the same plane coming out, and it just dies, right? And if you throw it right, it doesn't have any spin. Like Jose Contreras would throw it sometimes, and it almost became like a knuckleball because he could get his fingers so wide that it would come out and you could see kind of like a knuckleball spin. But with like the guys like Clemens and Tim Hudson, it gets here and just goes whew, and just disappears, right? So I always thought it was a pitch that more people should throw. And plus, some guys' arms they don't pronate, whatever it is, this way. They only go this way, so they have an easier time throwing breaking balls. And so guys have a struggle with changeup. So I always thought it was a pitch that, because you throw it just like a fastball and you just finish it the same, right? You just split your fingers. So I never understood why more people didn't throw it. I think it'd be a great pitch if you would start teaching people the proper way to throw it. Because I think the myth or whatever was that you throw it, you hurt your arm, right? Well, there's been plenty of guys that have thrown it and haven't hurt their arm if you throw it right.
Yeah.
So can we teach kids the right way to do it? Start throwing it. Because honestly, I think it's a great option if you can't do this and you can't throw a changeup and you can't make the ball slow down with the traditional changeup grip. Why not throw that? And I think it could be a weapon, but I don't know that we'll see it because I don't know that many people know how to teach it properly.
Yeah, it's a fair point.
I would agree, but I think the revolution will come in, and I think Contreras, you can tell me different. I only caught him for like a month, but Contreras's was a forkball, right? AJ?
I mean, I never understood it. It's like the difference between a slider and a sweeper. I get it's like one's this way and one. It's kind of like, okay, I get it. Yeah. But like, what's the difference? A forkball and a split. One guy throws it like this, right?
So the difference.
And one guy just gets it more deep.
Yeah, I don't actually know the difference.
They're kind of like the same pitch to me. I never understood. Like again, like one guy would throw it like this, right? And then Contreras would like dig it in and throw it like where his fingers were like that, and he would just rip it down. But so I honestly, I don't know the difference.
Massa's split was more like a traditional split grip, and Hosey's was that farther in. And I think you could say this, you could answer this too, Lance, like a true forkball will have less spin on it. A splitter will have more spin than a forkball. So it's kind of like the difference in the sweeper and the slider kind of thing. It's actually a different pitch.
I actually wasn't sure. I just assumed it was like the slider sweeper thing where like, I think a slider sweeper is like a sweeper is a slider. You know what I mean? Like you just have that large circle of like everything is a slider, and within that you get sweepers. I just thought it was like everything is a splitter, and within that you get how to get forkballs, such that if I said everything is a splitter, I'm not technically wrong. So I actually don't know. We have so few that are actually classified as forkballs. I don't think we have like the data to back up what it is. But like a good example is like I was looking through some pictures and I saw Ohtani actually throws two different splitter orientations. We're obviously not going to see him pitch this year, but like we're not really tracking those two differently. Like was one a forkball and one a splitter? Like I really don't know, but I thought that was interesting.
Massa would throw two different splitters. He would throw one that he caught, it seemed like more like a changeup, and then one that was just devastating and just would go straight down. But to answer your question, the revolution in pitches, whether it's going to be the splitter or not, is going to all depend on if they go robo umpires. Because if that happens, we are going to see pitchers that are going to be able to succeed by dropping certain pitches in the strike zone that is dictated by the robots and are essentially unhittable without an adjustment by the hitter to a different part of the box. So that, to me, that whatever that's going to be, whether that's that gyro spin slider that goes straight down, whether that's the sweeper, that's Bronson Arroyo type of sweeper that goes super huge and just so it touches and ends up 8 inches off the plate when a hitter wants to hit it, but it's going to hit, that's, to me, that's where the revolution is going to be when we go to the robo umpires.
Yeah, I'm fascinated, a quick comment here, just to see how pitchers adjust. Because like I think the way I think of the strike zone being called, if you actually look at called strikes, is like an oval, right? Whereas like the actual strike zone is a box, so you don't get those corners. So if I'm a pitcher, like I might just be trying to go after those corners. You might get like a really boring brand of baseball where I'm trying to throw like backdoor sweepers all the time, just like clip the corner, and the guy's like, I can't hit that, and it's not called a strike in the past, but now it is because we have a robo zone. I like the challenge system better personally. Just like a couple times, I think it adds a really cool element to the game where you can see who's really good at challenging. What players are good at it, what players are given the ability to challenge if you only have a limited amount of them. I think that's healthier for the game of baseball than going full robo umps.
It's funny. I was reading a scouting report this morning on Yuki Matsui, who's the guy who's probably signing with the Padres. And one scouting report said he had a forkball, and one said he had a splitter, and he doesn't have both.
That's what I'm saying. Nobody really knows.
Yeah. I also just thought of Junior Guerra. Do you remember him on the Brewers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember I did a few games of his, and I think he was a guy who learned to splitter, and it was just like, I'm 30. I'd been pitching in Mexico. Fuck it. I don't care if I get hurt. I'm going to throw a bunch of splitters no one else is doing. And yeah, nice little big league career. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That name came to mind. All right, 2 other things we want to cover with you quick, Lance. AJ's got a question to finish off, but I'll ask one before that. I'm kind of representing this gives analytics a bad look department today, right? So the other one that stood out to me is in the playoffs, Jose Berrios getting removed after a few innings of dazzling baseball, and then the Blue Jays people all blaming each other for why he was taken out, and it just became a mess. Obviously, many players have spoken out since then, both on the Blue Jays and elsewhere. What did you think when you were watching that and the aftermath of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get Berrios was dealing. I also totally understand that at a certain point, like the goal is to like almost catch it before it starts to crumble down, like, and I thought that Schneider did a reasonable job of that, like in trying to preempt it. I totally get that he was dealing. That's something I struggle with a lot of the time, is like how much non-analytics nuance to bring into that discussion. Like maybe he could have gone a little longer, but like I'd also be really curious on the biomechanics side. I don't know if they have this data in game yet. I think they may be getting it, depending on if they have some of the more advanced camera systems in stadiums. But I'm always curious, like from a biomechanic standpoint, talking to biomechanists and stuff, like what deteriorates in game that will help us predict a pitcher maybe struggling, in a couple 20, 30 pitches, or after he gets another up down and comes out in the next inning. Like, is there something biomechanically with that pitcher has a fingerprint that jumps out where it's like, oh yeah, he stops counter rotating as much, and like we see a slight velo downtick, and that generally precludes even more of a velo downtick. So I'd love to know whether there was more just thoughts that went into it. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too deep, and it was just like, it doesn't really matter if he's dealing, you're taking him out at this point, and like how that was communicated down to Schneider or whatever, I don't really know. Again, this goes back to our point where I think I'd love to track manager decisions like this. It's like, and if I was a front office, I would have this as like something to communicate with the manager. Like I would be like, hey man, I will give you the ability to veto a decision in a certain point, but like we will track and reflect on this going forward, such that in 2 months we now have a sample of you proved that you can tell visually or however, or from talking to Jose Berrios between innings, you got it. Like you're understanding the psychology of what his mind is like. Like I want my manager, if I was in the front office, I'd want my manager to veto my decisions that are analytically driven. And I'd want to track to see if he's good at calling whether certain pitchers, are good to go forward or whether we should actually pull them. I think what you'd find perhaps is that certain managers have better reads on certain guys than other guys. And I think on the reads the manager has better, I would give the manager more leeway than a guy that he's proven over the last 4 months he can't really tell when this guy's on or off. So I just think, again, it opens up the possibility to consider how these decisions are actually constructed from the top down, how scripted it is, et cetera. And I do think there's room for nuance. Like I understand from the analytics perspective why he was pulled. It obviously didn't work out. I don't know if bringing in Ryu was the proper move. They had Tim Maiza in the pen as well, who I thought was a better matchup in that situation. There's a lot of nuance there that goes into it. I just, again, I'm always the guy that's looking and trying to understand both sides. I just feel like most of the time we're just like, analytics are wrong. It's like, maybe they were kind of right in that situation, but maybe like Ryu was the problem, or maybe they were wrong, and maybe Schneider has the ability like to see when Berrios is dealing and to lean on him a little more.
Well, we just showed the Berrios line. It's kind of unfair because he didn't give up the run. I mean, he walked a guy, and then they took him out, and Kikuchi gave up. So it's kind of like a weird line because he really didn't give up a run, right? We see the run, the 3 innings, 3 hits, 5 strikeouts, but he didn't really, he did give up a run technically, but Kikuchi came in and gave it up for him. So that's kind of a weird stat. That's why when you look at it, you're like, what are they talking about? He gave up a run, but it wasn't necessarily, it was his run, but you know what I'm saying. My question is, you work for Marquee Network, right? Why haven't the Cubs done anything? Why haven't they made any moves? This is supposed to be their window. Why haven't you gone to Jed Hoyer and said, listen, Jed, hey, Craig, my analytics say we need to sign Shohei Ohtani. Why didn't you guys do that?
They're not paying me for that, AJ. They're paying me to be on air. I have no idea, man. It's a great question. You listen to Sports Talk here. I think everyone's kind of in the same boat and kind of wondering what's going on. I'm curious to see what moves they do make. I think like a guy like Imanaga would be an interesting ad. It's still relatively early. Like Swanson, I believe, was signed right around now last year. So it seems like things are moving a little slower perhaps than they were last year. But I also look at it as like, I don't necessarily know. Like last season, I think the offseason was kind of salvaged by Dansby Swanson signing. Like he also turned out to be one of the best shortstop. He had the best season, I think, from a WAR standpoint in that entire shortstop class. So it ended up being a great signing, I think, from just a we're in it standpoint. He's an incredible guy in the clubhouse, from what I understand. I've had a couple conversations with him. He's super sharp. I really enjoy talking to him. So, I like that move. I don't necessarily know if there is like a move that could salvage the offseason like that, right? Like, I don't know if adding Imanaga, Rhys Hoskins, and maybe another reliever gives you the same tone, especially when you miss out on all the top end arms and a guy like Ohtani. But the line here all the time has been, we're trying to make moves for now and the future. You've heard it over and over from Jed Hoyer and others. And I think they're really sticking to that. It's like the next free agent offseason class is huge. And I know people hate when it's like next year. But it's like at some point, from a calculus standpoint, I get why maybe going after, it's an Altuve, Bregman, Bieber, Fried. Like the class next year is crazy. Maybe they're waiting for that. But I get it if you're a fan and you're like, I don't really care about next year. I want to win this year, especially with a weak division for the most part, where some of the teams added lower level players that I don't think make a massive impact. Like the Cubs had a chance to differentiate from the rest of the pack and they haven't. And we'll see if they do in the next 2 months. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, they're on the clock. You try and finish second or third, over and over again on free agents, you're going to come up empty. So yeah, I think they'll do something, and I think Dansby was kind of a later sign, wasn't he? Dansby Swanson?
Yeah. I mean, he also was the one that we always thought, right,
would end up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't we always?
Yeah.
I mean,
He's
most people were like
shortstop in the class. Yeah.
Yeah, but it also fit the Cubs probably the best.
Sure.
From a everything stand, defense, makeup, everything, what they needed at the time.
I still feel that way.
I mean, there's guys that we feel like would fit with the Cubs now, and they just haven't gone after them yet that we know of.
Nope, not yet. So we'll see, Lance. We'll bring you back if something crazy
Get those
happens.
Ricketts to spend some of that money, Lance. Let's go.
No, they're spending it on Lance.
I'll try my best. Exactly.
Hey, they could trade
Thanks
for
for
Jake
having
Bowers.
They could. There's time, AJ. There's time.
He's never going to let it down. Lance, appreciate the time, man. We'll talk to you soon, all right?